Hey there, fellow soil enthusiasts! I'm about to share something that completely changed how I grow tomatoes, and it's going to blow your mind. Last season I stumbled upon a technique that's been hiding in plain sight for over a century, and when I tested it against my usual modern methods, the results were absolutely shocking. You know that feeling when you discover something so simple yet so effective that you wonder why nobody talks about it anymore? That's exactly what happened when I found this forgotten gem buried in my great-grandmother's 1920s gardening journal. What I'm about to share with you has tripled my tomato yield, improved disease resistance, and created the most robust plants I've ever grown. Here's the secret that's been quietly outperforming modern methods for a full century: planting tomato seedlings horizontally in deep trenches rather than vertically in holes. I know, it sounds completely counterintuitive. Everything we've been taught screams against laying our precious seedlings on their sides. But stick with me because the science behind this technique is absolutely fascinating. When you plant a tomato seedling horizontally, burying about 2/3 of the stem underground, something magical happens. Every single node along that buried stem develops into a robust root system. Instead of having one central taproot struggling to support your entire plant, you suddenly have multiple root zones working in harmony to feed your tomato. So, last season I decided to give this method a shot with just, 5 plants as a little experiment. And wow, the difference was so dramatic that my neighbors started asking me what fertilizer I was using. But honestly, I wasn't using any special fertilizers at all. It was just this century-old planting technique that, well, most gardeners have completely forgotten about. You see, modern gardening often focuses on amendments, fertilizers, and these complex feeding schedules. We dig standard holes, plant our seedlings upright, and then, well, we spend the entire season trying to support what's essentially a top-heavy plant with a limited root system. It's kind of like trying to support a skyscraper with a single foundation pillar. The horizontal planting method, it creates what I like to call a root highway, an extensive network that can access moisture and nutrients from a much larger soil area. When drought hit my region last summer, my horizontally planted tomatoes they barely noticed, while my traditionally planted ones needed daily watering just to survive. The buried stem nodes don't just create more roots, they create stronger, more adventurous roots. These roots spread laterally, creating a web of support that makes your plants incredibly resilient. I've watched my horizontally planted tomatoes weather storms that toppled my traditionally planted ones, even without additional staking. Getting this technique right requires a slightly different approach than what you're used to. But once you see the results, you'll never go back. Start by selecting healthy seedlings that are at least 6 to 8 inches tall with several sets of leaves. The key is choosing plants that are sturdy enough to handle the process but young enough to adapt quickly. Dig a trench about 4 to 6 inches deep and roughly 12 inches long. The exact depth depends on your seedling size, but you want to bury about 2/3 of the stem. Remove the lower leaves from your seedling, leaving only the top 2 or 3 sets of leaves above ground. This might feel brutal, but trust the process. Those buried nodes are about to become your plant's superpower. So you'll want to lay the seedling horizontally in the trench, with the root ball at one end and the leafy top gently curved upward at the other end. The stem should be lying flat along the bottom of the trench, with only the top portion and leaves emerging from the soil. Now go ahead and cover the stem with some loose, well-draining soil, but make sure to leave the top cluster of leaves completely exposed. Next up, water gently but thoroughly, making sure the soil makes good contact with the buried stem. Within just a few days, you'll notice the exposed portion of the plant starting to straighten up and reach for the sun. What you can't see is the incredible root development happening underground. This technique works because tomatoes are naturally inclined to develop adventitious roots. Those are roots that grow from stems rather than just from the original root ball. In nature, when tomato plants fall over or get buried by debris, they adapt by growing new roots from any stem nodes that come into contact with soil. So, the horizontal planting method, well, it basically mimics this natural adaptation process, giving your plants multiple opportunities to establish strong root systems. Each buried node becomes a new root zone, and that dramatically increases the plant's ability to absorb water and nutrients. What's particularly fascinating is how this affects the plant's overall architecture. With multiple root zones feeding the plant, you end up with stronger stems, more vigorous growth, and honestly, significantly better fruit production. The plants develop a lower center of gravity, making them naturally more stable and less dependent on extensive staking systems. Let me share some specific results from my comparison trials last season. I planted 20 tomato plants using traditional vertical planting and 20 using the horizontal method. Both groups received identical care, water, and growing conditions. The horizontally planted tomatoes produced an average of 15 pounds of fruit per plant, while the traditionally planted ones averaged just 8 pounds. That's nearly double the yield from the same varieties, same soil, same care routine. The horizontal plants also showed significantly better disease resistance, with only 10% developing any fungal issues compared to 40% of the vertical plants. Perhaps most impressive was their drought tolerance. During a particularly dry spell in July, I stopped watering both groups for 2 weeks to test their resilience. The horizontally planted tomatoes maintained their vigor and continued producing, while the vertical plants showed severe stress and several died. The fruit quality was noticeably superior too. The tomatoes from horizontal plants were larger, more flavorful, and had better shelf life. My theory is that the extensive root system provides more consistent nutrition, leading to more balanced fruit development. You might be wondering how to adapt this century-old technique for today's gardening challenges. The beautiful thing is that it works in virtually any growing situation. Raised beds, containers, and traditional ground planting all benefit from this method. For container growing, choose pots that are at least 20 gallons and elongated rather than round. The horizontal root development needs space to spread, so wider containers work better than deeper ones. I've had excellent success with half-barrel planters and large rectangular containers. In raised beds, this technique is particularly effective because you can control the soil quality more precisely. The loose, well-draining soil that most gardeners create in raised beds is perfect for encouraging rapid root development from buried nodes. Even if you're dealing with heavy clay soil, you can modify the technique by creating raised trenches with added compost and organic matter. The key is ensuring good drainage around the buried stem while maintaining consistent moisture. It's fascinating to think about why such an effective technique almost vanished from common gardening knowledge. The rise of commercial nurseries and standardized planting methods probably played a role. As gardening became more commercialized, simple techniques that didn't require special products or equipment were often overlooked in favor of methods that supported retail sales. The shift toward compact, determinate varieties also contributed to the decline of horizontal planting. Many modern tomato varieties are bred for uniform, upright growth, making gardeners less likely to experiment with alternative planting methods. Additionally, the focus on quick, easy gardening solutions has led many people away from techniques that require a bit more initial effort, even when those techniques provide far superior long-term results. I'm challenging you to try this technique with at least a few plants this season. Start small, maybe plant half your tomatoes horizontally and half traditionally, then compare the results. Document your experience with photos and notes, because I guarantee you'll want to remember the difference. The best part about this method is that it costs nothing extra and requires no special equipment. You're simply working with your plant's natural abilities rather than fighting against them. It's a perfect example of how sometimes the old ways really were the best ways. Ready to revolutionize your tomato growing? Try this century-old secret and watch your garden transform. Don't forget to subscribe to Soil Sage Chronicles for more hidden gems from the world of traditional gardening wisdom, and share this article with fellow gardeners who are ready to unlock their tomato plant's true potential.